Hey, and welcome to Vineyard Church Cardiff Online. It is great to have you with us wherever you are joining us from today. As normal on our online Sunday services, we're going to have some notices and some stories to start us off. And then Alice Meads, our associate pastor and also one of the site pastors for Cardiff Central, is going to be preaching and continuing our series in the Gospel of John, looking at Jesus' final moments and what he taught us in them. And then we're going to have another worship set. Now, it's not been pre-recorded before the lockdown this time. We've run out of those, but we've worked out a way to do some home recordings. So it's going to look a bit different, but hopefully you guys are still able to engage and worship along with us at home today. So let me tell you not just about the kids content, but the youth content as well. I feel really bad because I forgot to mention it over the last couple of weeks, but we have an amazing youth kind of group, ministry, however you want to call it, in our church. And they are continuing to meet online throughout this time. So if you are a young person and you're not connected with them, or you've got young people in your family who aren't connected, we would love for you to get connected with them. You can find out more information on our website about them, but also they have their very own YouTube channel where they're putting up lots of different content that you can connect with. On Sundays, there's also a podcast that goes out. And then on Tuesdays, they're still meeting together online, I think over Zoom, and chatting about different stuff with life and faith. What has been so encouraging is that, the youth are amazing anyway, but since lockdown, we've heard stories of them getting loads of prophetic words for each other and encouraging each other with scripture and just growing in their faith. At a time of crisis like this, it's been wonderful to see them push into their relationship with Jesus. So youth, big shout out to you. We love you and love the fact that you guys are pushing into Jesus. And if you're not connected with them and you're a young person, then we'd love for you to do that. Search Vineyard Youth Cardiff on YouTube, you'll find their channel, or go through the website and you'll find the details to get everything that you need, so check that out. And as I said, we do the kids content as well. We have been loving what the kids have been putting out, and if you've got young little ones and kids that you want to do church at home with, get the resources, guys. It's so good. Now, I was actually chatting to Dave, one of the kids pastors, who's also the youth pastor, and he was like, oh, I've got loads of feedback saying it's really good, but it just doesn't feel as good as church on a Sunday with the kids. And I'm just like blown away because the content they're putting out is great. And I'm like, whoa, if your kids on a Sunday is better than that, then, well, when we meet together, and if you've never been to us, you are going to want to get your kids to church for them to enjoy it. But the resources are wonderful. So head to cardiffvineyard.org/kids, and you'll find some great written content there and a link to the video for you to be able to do church at home with them. As always, we know that many of you are watching and maybe you've never actually come and joined us physically when we were meeting before the lockdown. Maybe the coronavirus situation has got you asking questions about faith, about life and death and meaning and all of those types of things. And we just want to say a big thank you to you for being brave enough to ask those questions, but also being willing to tune in and watch along with us. And we want to, as always, help you on that journey. So we've got the page that we always have, cardiffvineyard.org/whoisjesus, that has some resources on there for you to help you kind of ask the questions you're asking and connect with us. But also, we are really, really excitedly launching 2 online alpha courses for you to be able to sign up to. Just one of them, you can do both, I guess, if you really want to. But for you to sign up and go along online and ask the questions that you have about faith. If you don't know what alpha is, it's a short course that's been running for a couple of decades. And it just gives you a chance to hear some of the truth about the Christian faith, and then in a really relaxed and non-judgmental, informal environment, ask whatever questions you have and explore what you think about Jesus and who he claimed to be. So we would love for you to sign up to them. There's going to be one on a Sunday and one on a Tuesday. All of the info is going to be on our website. So if you head to cardiffvineyard.org/alpha, you'll find out what you need to find out. But we would love for you to come along. Now, you might be here listening and going, well, actually, I don't know if the course is right for me, but I've got a friend who it would be great for them to do. Church, I would love to encourage you to prayerfully consider who you could invite to Alpha. Lots of our friends and family are asking questions, and we would love for them to find out the source of peace that is Jesus. And so let's invite people this week. Drop them a text, just say, hey, would you like to come and do this with me? And we'll do it together online from the comfort of their own home. So have a think and let's get inviting people. If you've been a part of our church for a while, then you will know we love to party, we love to celebrate, we love to have fun. And that looks really different now that we're in lockdown together, but we don't want it to stop. So really, really cool. Next Saturday, we are going to have a whole church online pub quiz. It is going to be bonkers. We have the brilliant quiz master that is Tom Wiley. If you've ever been to a quiz by him, you know that he is not one to miss. It will be brilliant. The technical whizzes are working out exactly how it's going to work and how it's going to happen, but it's going to happen on Zoom next Saturday night, and we would love for you to be there. So let's get signing up. Get your team names, the wittier the better, and sign up online. The link to the event is down in the description, and so head there. Now, if you are signing up as a team, the one bit of information that you need to know is that only one of you needs to sign up. So if you're a small group doing it together, or if you're a house doing it together, then nominate your team captain, maybe give them the pressure of coming up with the great name and then blame them if it's rubbish, and get them to sign up. Only one of you needs to sign up. But all of the info is going to be on the event page, so click that, and if you've got any questions after that, email us and let us know, but it should give you all the info. And we would love to see you next Saturday for a night of slightly bizarre but a really fun pub quiz. Now, Sophie Douglas, who is the site pastor for Cardiff North, has some stories to share with us. So over to you, Sophie.
Hello, good morning, lovely to see you. I just wanted to update you about a few things going on in the life of the church at the moment, share some good news and some exciting stories. So, as you may know, as a church, a key part of our vision is that we want to restore the city one life at a time. And at a time like this, where it's really challenging for people out there, we felt increasingly called to just be courageously compassionate in the way that we are practically being the hands and feet of Jesus, showing people his love in such a crazy, difficult time. So there's a number of things that we've been doing. You may be aware of some of them already. So the first thing we've done is we've set up a task force of people who can practically support people in a number of different ways across the city. And the good news is that is currently 40 people, which is amazing. So thank you, superstar heroes who have been able to take part in that and be part of the task force. And there's a number of different things going on. So that's wonderful. That's the first thing that we've been doing. Now, the other thing we've been doing, you may be aware that under ordinary circumstances, we are part of the community who love and serve and support the people who normally meet at the Tues Centre of City Road, where we support people who are homeless or vulnerably housed by providing food for them on a regular basis. And it's also where our open door community meet on a Friday morning. Now, obviously, they can't meet as they normally would at the moment, so we can't provide food and hot meals for people in the way that we normally would. But the wonderful team and part of the task force this week prepared 25 meals coming from different people's homes, and they were delivered to people across the city who are homeless and vulnerably housed. So how wonderful is that people took the time to go shopping, get some food, make some meals and deliver them, and I should say all safely, all done within the government guidelines, maintaining social distancing but finding ways that we can continue to support people and make sure that they're not forgotten about, that they get fed, that the people that we love and support normally, we're just finding new creative ways to do that. So amazing, so encouraging that many meals have been delivered, and I think that's something that is going to continue, so wonderful. Now, also on the subject of food, another thing you may have seen is our new initiative called Food for the City. There are so many people who are struggling right now, and circumstances are so challenging that we were just aware that there are a number of families who are literally destitute, unable to feed themselves at the moment, and that is something that we just said, you know what, no, not on our watch. We want to do something about this. We want to be courageously compassionate and step up and step into this gap. So we have created Food for Our City, and we invited you as a community to give financially and also to donate food items. Now, I am so excited to be able to tell you this morning that that fund is currently sitting at £3,600. So thank you so much if you have been able to give towards that. That is a phenomenal amount of money, such outrageous generosity from you, our wonderful community. So thank you for giving towards that. And you know what, it's already being put to good use. There are already families who've been provided with cooking equipment and food so that they can feed themselves in this really difficult time. So thank you so much. Also, it's not too late. So if you've not been able to give but you would like to, if you've not got round to it, there's no pressure, but if you want to give towards it, you're so welcome to, and there's information on our website. So the financial giving is part of that, but also if you want to drop off food items, there's information on the website about the types of things we can collect and how we can do that. So that has started this week, which is really exciting, and again, it's something that we're going to continue to do. So if you want to find out any more about any of this, get in touch with us, go on the website, find out about different ways that you can be part of this community who are loving and serving and trying to bless our city and being courageously compassionate, stepping out and doing the stuff.
I hope those stories have encouraged you as much as they've encouraged me. It's raising my faith to know that we're still able to serve the city at this time. But I know that many of us can't serve in the way that we would want to, but the one thing that we can all do is pray. And so I would love for us as a church to be praying consistently for our nation at this moment, and praying especially for our national leaders as they try and guide us through the most unprecedented of times that we find ourselves in. I would love for you, if you want to pray with some other people, we have prayer gatherings going on throughout the week that you can sign up to. And they're just small groups of people meeting together over Zoom or something similar and praying over our nation and praying for lots of different things at this time. So you can find out about those on our website, cardiffvineyard.org/small groups, and the info's on there. Sign up for one of those and get praying alongside some other people within the church. But we also have a live prayer meeting that goes on at 8 p.m. on our YouTube channel on Sunday evenings. It's just 30 minutes long and it's led by different members of the pastoral staff each week. And I would love for you to join us as we pray on a Sunday evening. So maybe you're actually watching this church service now on Sunday evening and you're like, hang on a sec, I'm going to pause this. We'd love for you to pause it. Head on over to the live video and join us in prayer. But guys, that's enough from us updating you on things as they are. Let me just pray as Alice brings her word today. Holy Spirit, we welcome you. We thank you that we can still meet together online. And as Alice comes and preaches to us, would our hearts be soft, would our ears be open to hear your truth? God, would you convict us and challenge us through your word? And would we be encouraged and inspired to follow you? In Jesus' name, amen.
Hi, hello. Today we're going to be carrying on looking in John's Gospel. Last week was Easter Sunday, and James was looking at the story of Jesus' resurrection, the moment when he rose again from the dead, and he met Mary in the garden tomb, and we looked at how he appeared to his disciples. And over the next couple of weeks, we're going to stay in John's Gospel, and we are going to be looking at some of the encounters that Jesus had with his disciples, with his followers in that time. But before we started with that today, I wanted to start with a story from my childhood. Now, my parents got divorced when I was very little, and I grew up living with my mum. My paternal grandparents, that's my dad's parents, they lived all the way down in Devon, and maybe once a year, maybe less, my dad would come by, he'd pick us up and we'd drive all the way down to Devon to see my grandparents. And we would stay with them for a few days, and they had this lovely kind of old-fashioned house. It had like, that kind of wallpaper that's embossed and kind of velvety, you know what I mean, with the pattern is velvety, and it had like these floral carpets and big heavy curtains. It was really old-fashioned but lovely house. Now, many of you will know I have a twin sister called Chloe, and it may or may not strike you as a surprise to hear that we were little rascals as children, apparently. So bear that in mind as I tell this story. Now, the story goes that one summer, me and Chloe, the rest of my siblings, were with my dad, and we were down at my grandparents' house in Devon. And my grandma, one morning, we called her Grandma Potts growing up, that's a whole other story, but one morning Grandma Potts came into our room to find Chloe and I, probably 3 years old, maybe a little bit older, 3 or 4, swinging on the curtains in the bedroom we were staying in, like kind of monkeys on a tree, swinging on them. My grandma was horrified. At the time, I imagine I thought she was scared for my safety, but now I realise it was probably that she was scared for her house, that a whole load of plaster was going to probably get pulled off the wall. She was horrified. And anyway, we did this one time and one time only. I don't even remember it because we were so little. But what I do remember is this: every time we went down to stay with her, every year we went down and stayed there, from that moment on, she would remind us of that story. Even as a 12-year-old, who when you feel you're 12 and you feel like you're practically grown up, my grandma's kind of parting words as she'd tuck us into bed, give us a kiss goodnight, she'd be just walking out the door and she'd say, "And don't swing on the curtains." And she was being completely serious. I remember like at the age of 12 thinking, would she really expect me and Chloe to be swinging on the curtains? They would definitely have come off the wall by that point. I remember thinking at that time, as I was older, thinking, come on, that was like 10 years ago. Can we just move on now, please? And it was that story came to mind this week as I was looking at the story we're looking at today, the story of Thomas, who was one of Jesus's disciples. And the most famous story, if you know anything about Thomas, is the story of when the rest of the disciples, come to him and they say that they have seen the risen Jesus. And he doubts them. He doubts that this could have happened. And I wonder if Thomas felt even more so than I did when I was younger. This story, his doubt, is what he is known for. It's become his name. Even if you are, if you're not aware of the story in the Bible, you might have heard the expression a doubting Thomas. It's become what he was known for. This wasn't a name that was given to him by Jesus. It was a name he's kind of inherited over centuries of Christian tradition. What a nickname to have! What a reputation he has, and unfairly so, I'd say. He was a real man of God, was Thomas the disciple. We read about him earlier on in John's Gospel. In John chapter 11, there's this moment where the disciples, Jesus is saying to the disciples, we're going to go back to this area called Judea. We need to go back there. And the disciples kind of point out to Jesus, actually, do you remember last time we were there, the locals tried to stone you to death? Do you remember that? You probably don't want to go back there, Jesus. And Jesus, no, we're going back there. And the disciples and Thomas in that moment shows real leadership, courage, and he kind of calls them together and he says to the rest of the disciples, this is John 11, chapter 11, verse 16, he says to them, let us also go, that we may die with him. So off they went. He was a man who was willing to give everything to follow Jesus, even risking his own life in the process. Church tradition would have it that Thomas, in the days of the early church, would become a missionary all the way to India. He would go to share his faith about Jesus and eventually was martyred because of his faith. Thomas was a man of great faith, but his name has been synonymous with doubt. And because of this way this story has been interpreted, he is synonymous with a kind of a sense, he's been treated with a sense of disapproval. He is the disciple that let the side down. For many years, my understanding of this passage when I read it in youth group and stuff growing up was that Thomas doubts Jesus with the disciples. He doubts Jesus could have risen from the dead. And then a few days later, Jesus turns up and tells him off. And that's the end of it. And in that case, Thomas is the one not to be like. Thomas is the one not to be like. The best followers don't doubt. That's the kind of lesson that's often taught through this story. But the problem is, if that's when we end up in our thinking, then this story sits very uncomfortably for all of us, because doubt is a reality for all Christians at some point in their lives. So does that mean Jesus disapproves of us in our doubt? I don't think he does. I don't think that this is how we should understand this story, or how Jesus feels about us or our doubt. I think this story shows grace and understanding from Jesus. He understands that the Christian faith will involve moments or seasons even of doubt. Maybe you are in one right now as we find ourselves in this terribly hard and difficult time. Maybe for you, doubt is a real reality in your life right now. And my prayer today is you realise that Jesus has compassion and grace and mercy for you in that time, and that there's opportunity for good to come out of times like that. So let's jump in and read it together. We're going to be back in John's Gospel, as I said, John chapter 20, verses 24 to 31. So it starts by saying, now Thomas, also known as Didymus, which means twin. Thomas was a twin, which is probably why I love him so much. So now Thomas, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. Just as an aside, so what that's referring to is literally a few verses before, we looked at it last week, the moment where Jesus has appeared in a locked room to his disciples, and all the disciples were there but Thomas. We don't know what he was doing, whether he was on an errand, whatever it was, he wasn't there, he missed out. So this is what then happens. The other disciples come to Thomas and they told him, we have seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, put your finger here, see my hands, reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. Thomas said to him, my Lord and my God. Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Now, it's worth noting from the outset that none of the disciples believed before they'd seen Jesus resurrected. None of them believed in it until they saw it for themselves. We're told that when the women go to the tomb and they find it empty, they encounter an angel who tells them that Jesus has risen from the dead. They run back and they tell the disciples. And in Luke 24, we read that they didn't believe the women. The disciples, they didn't believe the women, and they went to see for themselves. None of the disciples were expecting Jesus to rise from the dead. So Thomas isn't alone in this moment. He has spent 3 years or so with Jesus. He has seen Jesus do the most incredible teaching. He has seen him change the lives of people around him. He's seen him do miraculous healings. And yet in that moment, maybe it's the hardship of the last few days with the reality of seeing Jesus crucified. Maybe that's hanging over him. And in that moment, he just can't believe. He doesn't believe. And you know, our journey can be the same, can't it? You know, we may have seen God do amazing things in our lives, you know, albeit we've not seen Jesus in the same way that Thomas had, but maybe we've seen God do amazing things in our lives. And then in a moment, it just all feels too unbelievable. We think, am I crazy to be a Christian? Am I crazy to even believe this? It can be just a moment, it can be a season. And doubt is not something that you can just bury and ignore, because there will always be a time when you have to put your faith in God, when you have to trust him, and like a time that we find ourselves in at the moment. You know, a season that we're in at the moment where everything feels hard, and our only choice, at least the only good choice we have, is to cling on to him and trust him and depend on him in this time. And when we face a moment like this, when we're in a season like the one we're in now, doubts can easily come to the surface. You know, doubts that we've pushed down under pressure can kind of bubble up to the surface. And we realise that we are not sure whether we believe God is real or good or able to provide or whatever it is. You know, maybe that's your experience right now. Maybe that's what you've been thinking as you've been facing the loss of your job, financial hardship. Maybe you've been praying for someone who's poorly. Maybe life just feels really tough at the moment. Maybe you're in a season of grief and you find yourself in a time of doubt. I would start by saying that doubt and faith are not the opposite of each other. You know, even in his doubt, notice that Thomas doesn't abandon his faith. Verse 26 tells us that he is in a locked room with his disciples. He's still with them. And in being with them, he's identifying himself still as a follower of Jesus. They have locked the room because they're scared for their life. That's why they're in a locked room. Identifying as a follower of Jesus was a risky moment. Thomas is showing the same level of faith as he did back in John 11. Let's go with Jesus, let's die with Jesus. It's the same faith that he has. He is still willing to die for his faith in Jesus. He is still choosing to have faith in this time, even in the midst of his doubts. Doubt and faith are not the opposite of each other. They can be held in tension together on the Christian journey. But of course, one can overcome the other. Doubt can easily overcome our faith if we let it. And also faith can, if we allow it, can overcome our doubt. You know, we can come out of a time of doubt with our faith strengthened, with our eyes fixed on Jesus. But this can be a really hard journey to go on. I appreciate that. I just wanted to kind of spend a bit of time thinking about what are some of the things that we can do to strengthen our faith through times of doubt. Here's just a few ideas. So my first thought is this: have faith in your faith. Have faith in your faith. Tim Keller tells us this. He says, our culture tells us to place our faith in our doubts and to doubt our faith. Culture tells us to put our faith in our doubts, to believe our doubts, and therefore doubt our faith. You know, doubt is the currency of our culture, isn't it? We're told to doubt everything, to question everything. That ultimately there are no answers to be had anyway. We shouldn't believe that there are any answers to be found. Our culture tells us that any faith is stupid and naive. But you know what, as people that believe in Jesus, we have a different option available to us. Instead of doubting our faith and putting faith in our doubts, we can put faith in our faith and have doubt in our doubts. Have faith in your faith. Dig deeply into the faith you already have in times of doubt. And this can include doing things like returning to favourite truths that you find in Scripture, your favourite passages in the Bible. Let the Bible speak truth to you in times of doubt. The last verse that we read, as we read out a minute ago, in verse 31 said this. This is John explaining why he's written his gospel. And he says, "But these accounts are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." John's saying, that's why I've written this whole gospel. That's the whole point. And we can kind of deduce that's the whole point of the whole of Scripture, is so that we may have faith, that we may believe, that we may be reminded of who God is and what he has done. The Bible tells us the stories of who God is and what he has done. And by reading them, we can encounter the Son of God, the Messiah, and that by believing we may have life in his name. Going back to Scripture, to the truth of the Bible, can increase our faith, can give us faith in doubt. Digging back into our faith can also look like reminding ourselves of what God has done in our own lives, our own stories of Jesus. You know, remembering moments of faith in our past can help us when we are in moments of doubt at the present. They can give us faith for the moment we find ourselves in. You know, for me, there are a few stories in my life that I will always go back to if I'm ever doubting God at all, or feeling anxious that he may not provide, or I cannot trust him, or any of those feelings I might have. There's a few key stories I always go back to, moments where I kind of undeniably, I cannot say that God doesn't exist, that I know in that moment that God was there. I have a whole load of these, you know, just to share one with you. You know, I remember years ago, Matt and I, this is when we were just dating, so it was quite a long time ago, when we were living in Nottingham at the time, and we were in church one evening, and we were with a whole load of people. There's about 400 people probably there that evening in the service, and we were in a series teaching on hearing from God, how to hear a word from God. And the leader invited us just to take a moment, all of us in that room, all 400 of us, to have a moment to ask God if there was any word that he would give us to then for someone else that was there that evening. So we all sat there in silence for a minute. It's always awkward, isn't it? Silence in a big room like that. We sat there and prayed, and I wasn't sure I had anything. I said nothing. And then there was a moment where the leader, John, he invited people to, there was a mic going round, and you could share if you had a word for anyone that was there. And the next thing I know, Matt next to me has put his hand up. Yep, he's got a word. So he stands up and he shares this word. He shared that how as soon as he'd got there that evening, he'd had like a weird feeling in his tummy. His tummy had felt weird. And he felt as soon as in that moment of waiting from God to hear from God, he felt God say to him that someone here, this is the word, someone here is not eating right. And as Matt stood up and shared that, God also gave him a name, Naomi. So Matt shared that someone here is not eating right, and I think their name is Naomi. And other people then shared their words. And then there was a time for anyone that wanted to respond to say that, yep, one of those words had been for them. And lo and behold, a girl, probably 18-year-old, she was a few blocks away from us in the auditorium, and she stands up. And she explains that she doesn't normally come to this church, that she was at a point in her life when she was ready to walk away from her faith. But her friends had brought her here that evening to this service. And that she has struggled with an eating disorder. And she'd said to God, you know, I don't know if you care about me. I'm going to walk away from my faith unless I hear from you this evening. And this girl's name was Naomi. And she shared that. And, you know, we talked to her and prayed with her afterwards. And I've not obviously seen her since, but I don't know what happened to the rest of that story, except to say that that story for me is one that I come back to in times of doubt or questioning God. Because I know Matt, I know there is no way he could have known that if that wasn't from God. There's only one way he could have known that. And that was because he'd heard from God. That's a story that I go back to that gives me faith. Another good thing to do to kind of have faith in our faith is to use the faith of other people. Staying in community is really important in times of doubt. You know, that's what Thomas does, doesn't he? He keeps himself in community with the other disciples, with his friends, and those people that are also trying to follow Jesus in this time. You know, we need each other's faith in moments of doubt, in seasons of doubt, because it can be so disorientating when we doubt, can't it? And we need people around us, the faith of those around us, and in that process we can kind of grab onto their faith. You know, the image I have in my mind is like being all at sea in doubt, disorientated, all at sea in a time of doubt. And someone else's faith in that moment can be like a life raft that you can grab out to and grab onto. The reality is when people are struggling with doubts, one of the kind of the most common things, often the first thing that goes, is them being in community. They stop coming to church, they stop going to small group, they stop engaging. And that is a serious step towards letting doubt overcome your faith. That is a serious step towards doubt overcoming your faith. A community of faith is so important in a season of doubt. Have faith in your faith. Invest in your faith. Dig deep with the faith you already have in those times. So have faith in your faith, and then secondly, examine your doubts. A great question to ask during a time of doubt is, what is behind me thinking this? What is behind me thinking this? As Christians, so often when we are doubting, we are actually asking a question of God. And often the question we're asking comes from a place within us of deep pain, a difficult place, a time when we felt let down or unheard, where we have different expectations of God, a time when he seems very distant. Let's not forget the context of that Thomas is in this time, the context of his doubt. The awful shock that it would have been Good Friday, the grief and the despair that he must have been feeling in this time. In the midst of all this pain, all this death, all this suffering, he doubts whether there really could be good news. He's so surrounded by the reality of death. For him, this story that there is life just doesn't seem believable, and he doubts in that moment. I wonder if the question he's asking in the midst of his pain is, God, are you really that good? Can you really be that good? I think many of us will have asked that question. If you're in a season of doubt right now, what question is it you're asking of God? What is the question that you've got for God? And behind that, dig deeper. What is the pain behind that question? The invitation today is to bring that pain to Jesus. Bring that pain before him. And as we will see in the story later on, as Thomas is met by Jesus in his pain, that Jesus will be gracious and kind with you in the midst of your pain. Examine your doubts. Know that God can use them. Take heart that God in time can use doubts to reach out to the world around us. Our doubts just show us to be real people. It means that we're not these kind of cardboard cutout Christians, that we have doubts and questions just like everyone else. I often think about how Thomas would have responded later on in his life, as a missionary, when he was telling people about the truth of Jesus, and maybe they say to him, do you really expect me to believe Jesus rose from the dead? I can imagine him being like, I have been there, my friend. Me too. I also doubted that once. But let me tell you what happened to me when I doubted that. Just think of it. Think of the amazing impact Thomas, the story Thomas could tell in that moment, the impact that story would have in that moment. Being able to respond to the world around us with a me too is so important if we're going to reach out to a world that is so full of doubt and questions, which I think it is right now. It is so important. Our journey of doubt can be so important in reaching out to the world around us. Sometimes as Christians it can feel really threatening, can't it, when people criticise our faith. We can get really defensive, can't we? We can kind of be tempted to kind of beat them down with our theological reasoning, rather than to ask them what the question really is. And even further than that, what is the pain behind that question they're asking? What is the struggle there? I remember years ago, Stephen Fry, a national kind of broadcasting hero in my mind, I realised I actually spoke about him a few weeks ago, so I keep going back to him. I do love him dearly, and not just because he's the voice of Winnie the Pooh on my kids' story CD. I love him dearly, but he is a huge sceptic of the Christian faith, and a few years ago he spoke out in an interview and he questioned the logic that there could be a God, that there could be a loving God in a world that is full of so much suffering. And he spoke in quite kind of brutal language. And I remember the torrent of abuse he received from Christians on social media. Christians were incensed by this kind of cynical grenade that Stephen Fry, it seemed, had kind of thrown at us as Christians. And you know what he did? He spoke about God in a way that was upsetting or painful for me to read. But you know what? I was actually more upset about the response he received on social media, where Christians simply threw a grenade right back at him. Instead of admitting that actually as Christians, many of us will have asked questions around suffering. Many of us will have had those questions, albeit from a very different starting point and using very different language. But many of us will have asked those questions. Instead of searching for the pain in his life that is behind those questions and meeting him in that place. You know, at the end of this blow up on social media, I can't imagine that Stephen Fry was any closer to encountering the love that Jesus had for him in the midst of his pain. You know, as Christians, we have to see that the world around us is asking questions. We have to see the pain in those questions that the world is asking. And we get to share that we have been in that place too, but that faith is still possible. So examine your doubts. Have faith in your faith and examine your doubts. And then the next point, embrace the mystery. Embrace the mystery. Putting faith in our faith as we do that and as we examine our doubts, we'll get to a point where we realise that there are some things that we will never know or understand this side of heaven. 1 Corinthians 13 verse 12 says this, "For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then in heaven we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known." Do you know what? There are some things I just don't believe that we'll know this side of heaven, that we will have a clear answer to this side of heaven. For whatever reason, God wants it to be that way. You know, we are limited as human beings in our ability to understand. And absolute certainty is not something that we can experience at this point. And in that sense, we will have to accept that we will always have doubts in our Christian journey. Frederick Buechner, who is an American minister and writer, he says this, "Without somehow destroying me in the process, how could God reveal himself in a way that would leave no room for doubt? If there was no room for doubt, there would be no room for me." This side of heaven, Jesus does not invite us to certainty, but to trust. Jesus is not inviting us to certainty, but to trust. That is the journey of faith, trusting that we do not have all the answers. In a season like this, we don't have all the answers. We don't know. But we get to trust that he does and that he is enough. And so finally, for any of us in the season of doubt, ultimately, let's take heart that the answers that we are looking for are in a person, Jesus. As we've said, you know, it was a week later and Jesus, he turns up amongst the disciples once more. And his response to Thomas in that moment is pure grace. There's no shaming, there's no telling off. Just note how similar this moment is when Jesus turns up in a locked room with his disciples, the same locked room. How similar it is to the verses, before that James looked at when he turned up the last time, a week earlier in that locked room. It's like Jesus has recreated the exact same scene, but this time for Thomas. Note how he beckons Thomas over, how graciously he meets him in his doubt. Thomas has said that he needs to see Jesus' hands, to put his finger on the marks left by the nails, to place his hand into his side. That's what he said to the disciples a week before. See how closely Jesus has heard him. See the grace in the detail by which Jesus has heard Thomas. This is what Jesus says to Thomas in verse 27. "Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas, I've heard your doubts, is what Jesus says. And Thomas in that moment, he gets to touch Jesus. Thomas, who has questioned, can life come out of death like that? He gets to touch Jesus, to feel the warmth of his skin, to feel him breathing. He gets to reach in and touch the living, breathing Jesus. Where there should have been death, where there's pain, where there's the scars on his side, the scars on his hands, where there should have been death, he gets to touch out and feel that there is life. To Thomas's questions, to his doubts, Jesus provides himself. The answer Thomas gets back is Jesus. And in that moment we read Thomas falls to his feet in worship. He shouts out, "Jesus, you are my Lord and my God." He is overcome by the grace of Jesus in that moment. Jesus seeks Thomas out. That is pure grace, pure kindness by Jesus. And then in those last few words, he seeks us out. Jesus seeks us out. Read this. "But blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." He's not addressing Thomas in this moment. That's not him telling him off. He's not addressing the disciples even, because they all have seen and then believed. But he's addressing us, those of us that have not seen and yet believed. This is a moment of pure kindness, pure grace by Jesus. Jesus understands how hard it is for those of us that we're living in this tension between doubt and faith, who will live only seeing in part. And to us he extends his blessing and his encouragement, which one day we'll receive that blessing and encouragement directly from Jesus. when we meet him face to face, when we have our encounter with Jesus, like the one Thomas has, when we finally get to do what Thomas does, we get to see him face to face, to touch him, to see that he bears the marks of death, but that he is alive, to see that this really is good news. And in that moment, all our doubts will be gone. Can I just pray as we finish? Lord Jesus, thank you that you meet us in our doubts. We thank you that you are the answer to our doubts. We thank you that we can trust that whilst there is still mystery, we know that you have the answers. I just pray right now for anyone listening to this who is in a season of doubt, and I pray that they would be able to bring their doubts to you, their pain to you, and know that you are with them. Amen.
There was a moment when the lights went out, when death proclaimed its victory. The King of love had given up his life, the darkest day in history. There on a cross they made for sinners, for every curse his blood atoned. One final breath and it was finished, but not the end we could have known. For the earth began to shake, and the veil was torn. What sacrifice was made as the heavens roared? And all hail King Jesus. All hail the Lord of heaven and earth. All hail King Jesus. All hail the Savior of the world. There was a moment when the sky lit up, a flash of light breaking through. Oh, when all was lost, he crossed eternity. The King of life was on the move, for in a dark, cold tomb, where our Lord was laid, one miraculous breath, we're forever changed. All hail King Jesus. All hail the Lord of heaven and earth. All
Standing over you, Jesus. Oh, the angels cry, holy. And all the elders cry and are at your feet. Oh, the angels cry, holy. And all the elders cry and are at your feet. This is our space. This is our space. Just to worship, standing over you. This is our space. This is our space. Thank you. Thank you.
Found in your name the power to save. With only a whisper, a mountain shake. Jesus, our hope and strength. You made a way to unlock these chains. Here in your presence, strongholds break. Freed by the love you gave. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. There on a tree, merciful King, broken and shameful all to see. The Father laid down His Son. From darkness to light, death lost to life. Heaven and earth will join and sing. Jesus has overcome. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest with every breath that's in my lungs. My heart cries out, to you belongs the glory. And through every loss or victory, my soul will rise to only bring you glory. And with every breath that's in my lungs, my heart cries out, to you belongs the glory. And through every loss or victory, my soul will rise to only bring you glory. I'll bring you glory. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. Oh, you deserve it all. Like a deer panting for the water, so my soul thirsts after you. And I have tasted of your goodness. Now nothing else will do. So come fill us again. Come fill us again. So come fill us again. Come fill us again. Like a deer. Like a deer panting for the water, so my soul thirsts after you. And I have tasted of your goodness. Now nothing else will do. So come fill us again. Come fill us again. Pour out your spirit Spirit of the living God, come and fall afresh on us. We know that there's always more. Like a fire, like a flood, like a wind, like a dove, would you come like you have before? Oh, Spirit of the living God, come and fall afresh on us. We know that there's always more. So come fill us again, come fill us again. Pour out your Spirit, we're hungry for more. Come fill us again, come fill us again. Pour out your Spirit, we're hungry for more. So come fill us again, come fill us again. Pour out your Spirit, we're hungry for more. Come fill us again, come fill us again. Pour out your Spirit, we're hungry for more. We're hungry for more of you.
Thanks so much for joining us today. It's been wonderful to have you with us. If there's any way that we can help you explore who Jesus is or help you in practical ways, then get in touch with us. All of the details are below. We would love to hear from you. But as always, have a great week and we'll see you next time.